Hi there, what's up? Welcome to Frames TM. And today we have a special guest, photography discourse. I have Baron with me tonight or today, where depending on where you are. And we have a lot of things to discuss. Things that you all typically love. Rumors, anticipations, discourses about camera. Hi Baron, what's up?
Hi, Frames. How are you? Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I just came back today shooting with a 500 PF.
Yeah,
And yeah.
I've seen some of your videos with the Z8 in this last week, and they look really nice. Um, that bird one was really in particular was very nice. I like the presentation style, and it was serene and kind of reminded us that the photography is more about the photography than the gear, which we all know, but we obviously still love gear, so it's a give and a take. But that was a great video, and I appreciated it. And you also really did demonstrate that the Z8 is doing very well with high temperatures. So that was good to see.
Yeah, and today was even like it was even hotter. So it was like I think what 39 degrees when I was because I today was when I reached the place. It was around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, evening, and the sunset here is at about 7:37. So it's quite it was not like nice sunset light. It was quite warm
And for those
and
that don't know, 39 degrees Celsius is quite warm in Fahrenheit. In fact, let's ask Siri. Hey Siri, what is 39 degrees Celsius in Fahrenheit? So the answer is 102.2 degrees Fahrenheit. So for those of you that are watching in the United States or anywhere where Fahrenheit is used, Frames has been shooting the camera in over 100-degree temperature.
yeah. And tomorrow is one more day. Tomorrow I'm going to go out in the morning again, and but I have to say, I mean, I could clearly see a difference between an F mount lens like this, the PF, and this is a prime lens. This is a very high quality prime lens, and the 100 to 400 is a zoom lens, and you know, uh, but a Z mount lens. That lens works much better on the Z8.
So
There's a
when you
clear
say it
difference.
works better, are you saying that the image quality is better, or
No.
the focusing speed is better, or what is better?
I feel as if this has got a smoother bokeh rendition. This one, the PF, but the 100 to 400 is that the autofocus is much faster. So, for example, it can go from near focus to far focus quickly and without getting confused. This one, like I honestly, when I shot with the 100 to 400, I had more difficult situations. And today, when I went out, um, the birds were actually giving me more time to shoot them. But still, um, I I took more time to shoot them today because I had to sort of when I had to kind of shoot the ground, or shoot something very close to me and bring the focus back to near focus and then try and shoot maybe a little bird on a branch. So I had a bit of struggle with it today. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Did you ever get a chance to shoot with that lens on a DSLR?
no,
So that
I
would
was,
be it would be
yeah,
interesting to know if it's the same, or because most people have said that the f mount lenses on the Z8 or the Z9 anyway, and I assume it's similar on the Z8, um, perform, if anything, better than on the
yeah,
DSLR. I know that's
mm,
true of the portrait lenses. For example, the 200 f2, the 105 1.4, really every f mount I still use on occasion, the 58 1.4,
mm,
they all work better, I would say, on even on the
mm,
Z6II than they did on the D750.
yeah, yeah,
And now with the Z8, it's even presumably even a little bit better. I guess I haven't been on in a while. It's been like a few months since I've done a video. largely because I made a big move and I've had a lot of work lately and it's been kind of crazy. But I wanted to address, I had made some Z8 predictions in the past, and I think most of which came true, but there was some fundamental ones that were not true. Um,
Hmm.
Namely, that the sensor was a 45.7 megapixel sensor, just like the Z9, that it was not necessarily that it was stacked because I was torn on that whether it would be stacked or not, and I was torn for the very same reason that I'm also a little bit torn for the future on what is coming, and that will I guess we'll get to that in a moment. Um, and then the frame rates were higher than I expected, but that went along with me thinking that it would be a higher megapixel camera. If it had been 60 to 80
Mm.
megapixels, I don't think they would have gone with 20 frames raw.
Mm.
It would have been less, maybe 12 to 15. But
Yeah.
in this case, it's interesting because I saw an interview with one of the Nikon executives who basically said they had a lot of different options for the Z8 and they were considering these different options and they went with the Z9 pared down, like the well, call it the baby Z9 if you want, or just the smaller Z9. I don't think it's a baby Z9 because actually it's just this, it has almost all the functionality. I would basically say it's a smaller Z9. Um,
Yeah.
and I think they went with that because they decided that that's what most people were asking for.
Mm.
So they were trying to accommodate the audience, and that's great. I think that's great, and it certainly did accommodate the audience because, in spite of what my predictions were, like for my personal style of shooting, what they gave me is most likely better than what I was predicting.
Yeah.
I don't need 60 or 80 megapixels anyway, personally. Um,
Um. Mm.
so
You
anyway, I just
know.
wanted to say I wanted to put that out there because in most other respects, I mean, there was a lot of people saying it was going to be the form factor of a Z6. I said from the beginning that would never be true, that it would be bigger and more robust, that it would have pro UI and the lights. All of that was the case, and I pretty much had no doubt about that ever.
Yeah. So is that just water
This is just
or some?
water. Yeah. So
Okay.
we talked. So frames, you and I we speak for those who don't. I mean, obviously, if you're watching this video, you don't know, but Frames and I do have a chance to talk. I would say I wouldn't say often, but I'd say periodically,
Yeah.
and we do communicate a lot, and we discuss this kind of stuff even when we're offline. And we've been talking a lot now about. So now that Nikon, so I guess from my perspective, and I think Frames agrees with this what I'm about to say. It was always my belief that the Nikon Z system was growing into itself and that they were catching momentum. And based on some of the fundamentals of the system, they were in a position to ultimately surpass the other brands. Um,
Mm.
and namely, that's because of the Z mount. And they did actually discuss that on the at the launch in 2018 about how the mount was so important and why the mount was going to give them an edge in the future. Um, and it kind of got glossed over because at that time, in spite of saying all of that, they only gave us 1.8 lenses and f4 zooms. So a
Mm.
lot of people were very disillusioned, including myself at the time, by the fact that they were touting a very special mount, but giving lenses that seemed to be very standard and very common. And
Mm.
it
Mm.
turned out we all learned over time that the 1.8 S lenses they gave us are not 1.8 lenses of the past. These are professional grade, high end lenses with IQ unrivaled by most other, well, certainly by the old system and by even most of the competitors' equivalent offerings. And same with the f4 lenses. I just did a shoot the other day in a studio with the 24 to 120 f4 S lens. It's fantastic. That lens is it's a spectacular lens. So, and now we're bringing out the fast lenses, and really all that was left for Nikon as of a month ago was
Mm.
the fact that they didn't really have a body below the Z9, obviously, that could compete with the competition.
Yeah.
Now that is not the case. The Z8 is the unrivaled, at the moment of this recording, this is June 3rd, 2023. The Z8 is the unrivaled um, best in class hybrid camera on the market right now.
Just like the Z9
Well, is that?
in
But I'm saying like
in
even
Z9's class.
it's the same as the Z9, Z9. We'll say Z for this. Um, it's the same as the Z9 in the sense that the Z9 is just as good, but I would say that the Z8 is the best hybrid camera because it fulfills the most use cases for a hybrid shooter, even more than the Z9. And the reason I say that is a Z9 is not as good on a gimbal. It's not as good when you're like trying to be mobile, and hybrid shooters are extremely
Mm,
mobile.
mm,
And where the Z9 shines is in its ability to do extended video beyond 90 minutes or whatever that is. But Z8 does 90 minutes even at the highest codecs, and that is more than enough for 99% of hybrid shooters.
yeah.
So what I'm saying is the Z8 is the best hybrid camera, even better than the Z9, because for hybrid usage, it's better than the Z9.
Mm, mm,
So I think the Z8 is the best hybrid camera on the market. It absolutely smokes like the Canon R5, which is a great camera. I don't say that to be disparaging, and I'm sure the R5 Mark II will be an excellent camera. Presumably, it will compete with the Z8 because
mm,
Canon is not stupid, and they also make good cameras.
mm,
Um, but at the moment, the Z8 is a much better camera than an R5, and Canon knows that, and they knew that before it came out, and that's why they dropped the price down to like $3,000.
mm,
So they're not. It's not to disparage Canon. They're doing a great job of what they're doing. And as far as the Sonys go, I don't I don't think there is a Sony that. I mean, it's an irony because the Z8 is a $4,000 camera. The A1 is a $6,500 camera, so it's $2,500 more. And the A1, and let's just be frank about it, the Z8's a better camera. So it's like it's just straight up a better camera. So, and then the only thing that's left now is that there are some naysayers that still want to say that the autofocus is better on the Sony or the Canon than the Nikon. That is actually basically not the case anymore. People who are saying that are actually referring to one mode, which is autofocus, which is AF or auto area AF, which is it's the idiot mode for autofocus. It's the one where you don't make any selections, you just let the camera do everything for itself, which is a mode that's honestly not one I use a lot in what I do because it's much preferable to have selection in my opinion. And I have used the R6 Canon, and because the argument is, well, the other cameras do the selections by themselves very well, and you don't need to do it. And that's true to a level, but it's not foolproof. Those cameras make mistakes as well. And the 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 Nikon, I've been using the Z8 now for a couple weeks, and it's pretty much right there. It's pretty close. And if you know what you're doing with the AF system, it's actually superior. And we've learned there's a guy, there's a wildlife photographer on YouTube. His name is Jan something or other. I can't remember. Foreign guy, foreign in the sense of
mm.
not American, but
I think he's Australian,
yeah, and
Jan.
he uses all the systems, and he basically said like if you know what you're doing with the Z8, it's as good or better than the others. So and we pretty much there's really not really the only naysayers that are left are people that are radically biased because of whatever affiliations they have with whatever their company is. Now, some people would say that I'm radically biased because I also and have admitted in the past that I have a bias towards Nikon because I've been shooting it for over 30 years. But I don't get paid by Nikon at all for anything, and or from any other company. And I have had opportunity to use the other cameras. Um, and I think it's pretty clear now that the Z8 is the top hybrid camera. That said, part of the reason is, and now we go back full circle to what happened in 2018, which is the Z mount. The
Yeah.
Z mount now is the line is relatively built out. There's still some things missing, but really you can do anything with a Z lens that exists today. Just about, except for maybe tilt shift, but even then you can adapt an F mount, no problem. So it is able to do that. But for all the other focal lengths, you pretty much have something that covers now. And the Z mount lenses are superior and I'm going to say that straight up, to the competition across the board. There are exceptions. There's a lens here and there where you could say that there's rival lenses, but across the board as a body of glass, these are the best lenses in terms of build quality, in terms of IQ, aberration control, focus breathing, you name it. There's nothing to really compete with them. The Canon RF lenses are nice lenses, but they're definitely not built as well. Like you take a 51.2 against the Nikon, they're not. It's not built as well. It's much noisier. It focus breathes worse. There's a lot of issues. The Sony lens, the Sony F 51.2, it's very small and that's convenient, but it's a terrible focus breather, which makes it a bad hybrid lens. So the fact of the matter is the Nikon system has arrived. And now the question that is posed is, well, it has arrived and you have the best hybrid camera in class. However, that camera is still $4,000, which
Mm.
is a fair price for what it is, but it's still at a price point that prices out many non-professional shooters. And
Even a lot of professional shooters.
excuse me?
Even a lot of professional shooters.
Even perhaps professionals, but if you make money using the camera, you can always justify a higher cost more easily
Mm.
than if you don't
Mm.
make money with a camera. Because if you don't make
Mm.
money with it, you're just spending money. If you make money with it, you know
Mm.
you're getting money back.
Mm.
So it
Yeah,
makes it much more expensive for someone who doesn't use it for professional purposes. So that leads us to, and this is where like the Canon and the Sony systems still shine with respect to Nikon, and that is at the $2,500 price point. Because at
Mm.
that price point, the R6II and the A7 IV are superior cameras to the Z6II. There's no question about that. They're also a generation or two. Well, in Sony's case, they're like 3 or 4 generations newer, and in Canon's case, they're like it's a generation newer. But
Mm.
nevertheless, Nikon hasn't matched that yet. Now we know they can, and we know they will. And when that happens, I think Nikon's going to just really have such a huge edge. Nikon's going to be back to where they were before 1987. Not in market share. That will not ever probably happen because of the way the world works now with marketing. Um, but as far as the technical, like if you went back to 1983 and you asked someone what the best professional/consumer brand of a 35 millimeter camera is, that it's mainstream, not ruling out things like Leica, very niche things that nobody would buy unless they were basically millionaires. Um, it was Nikon. Now, there's
Mm.
no doubt about it. It was Nikon. Like Nikon was the superior camera in that era. And I think the Nikon has recaptured that, being able to make that claim with respect to what they're offering as a product. So I'm sorry to have been so long-winded, but I wanted to like give a global perspective of where I'm coming from, and I think largely where Frames probably is coming from, although he may disagree with some of what I said, and I'm sure he'll let us know. Um, but that said, the question now is what I guess if you want to address it, the Z6 III is the next really huge step because that camera has to compete like more than toe to toe. Hopefully, it has to surpass what is currently out at that price point, and
Mm.
ideally keep the price down so that and ideally, if they could undercut the competition on that camera, that as far as price goes, that would be very helpful for bringing people over. And we have started to see people. There's actually videos starting to appear online now of people switching from Sony or Canon to Nikon. Haven't That's something we haven't seen
Oh,
in.
I haven't seen that though
Yeah, there was a
yet.
young kid. I was surprised. He must have been early 20s, and he had made a video about why he switched to the Z5 from the
Oh yeah,
A7.
I watched that. Yeah,
And
yeah.
it was interesting because it wasn't, he had his reasons, and in the end, it was a lot of it was just ergonomics and just the use of the camera and how he
Mhm.
found it to be more fun to use because Sony is such a point and shoot. I mean, I was joking with some people the other day. I'm like, stop using that point and shoot camera. And the guy's like, it's an A7 IV. It's not a point and shoot. And I said, all Sonys are point and shoots. That's what they're made to be. That's why you love the autofocus and auto area, right? Because you want to point and shoot. So and I was joking. I was being a little bit of a, I was being kind of a snarky to say that, and I was joking, and the guy knew I was joking. We're friends, so it wasn't he didn't take it badly. But it's kind of true. And this kid who's like a young kid in his 20s discovered that he enjoys photography more with a Z5
Mm,
than he does with
mm,
an A7 IV. And
mm,
that's an ironic thing to say because I think there's no debate as to whether the A7 IV is not a superior camera to a Z5. It's clearly a superior camera to a Z5. There's no question about it. It's superior to a Z6II as far as technical. But this kid realized that there was something more than just the specs. And we've always thought that about Nikon. Those of us that use Nikon know that they're the most comfortable cameras to shoot. They ergonomically they're just superior. But you can also have an enjoyable shooting experience per se. But that's without the technology even matching. So imagine the Z6 III comes out and the technology is as good, or let's say even surpasses, and now you have this wonderful line of Z lenses that can be used. It's an unparalleled system, and really Canon and Sony can't really compete with the Z mount in the long run. I think Canon has a better run of it because they have a closer mount in terms of what they've got, but the Sony E mount is an inferior APS-C mount. It's they used that from the beginning. To I don't know why. I think it's because they had the mount ready and they just used it. They make a lot of marketing claims about how that won't hold them back, but that's false. There's physics that cannot be denied. They can do tricks in the camera, like they have focus breathing compensation, which is basically just a crop. It's just an internal crop. That's not actually a solution at all. To me, that's a terrible solution because if you're cropping, then you're losing the point of the lens anyway. So really they're in trouble in the long run. They can't. Nikon will continue to make lenses that are more and more unique that take advantage of the wide throat diameter and the small flange distance, and Sony won't be able to follow in their steps. They won't be able to follow, and Canon will struggle as well at some point. That all said, Z6 III frames.
Now, I think the question is to me, uh, should the Z6 III be a class leader or not? Number one. Number two, if so, if Nikon, because see, to your point, which you're making early in the conversation, you said that, Z8 is leading the pack. I would say even the Z9 is leading the pack so far, with the Canon R3 being Canon's semi flagship because they don't have, let's say, an R1 yet. So now, similarly, I would say that now that you have the Xpeed 7, um, the job for Nikon is to ensure that at $2,500 price point, the Z6 III starts leading the pack. Now, if that's the ambition, and I'm assuming that that is going to be the ambition, if that's not the ambition, then things will change. If that's the ambition, also we have to understand that they've had the benefit of time in the sense that um, the Z8 is a mini Z9, and they did work, they did tinker around with some other technologies. They did have the time for almost 2 years now, for almost what, 4 years to work on the Z6 II, and 2 years after the launch of the Z9 to figure out what to do with the Z6 II, Z6 III. And it's going to be at least a year later after the launch of the Canon R6 Mark II, which means
When
that
did
if you're
that
coming,
when did that camera launch? I forgot.
I think it's been already 6 months
Okay.
or more. Now, given this gap, it is natural for Nikon to kind of want to have lead in the market in that price segment, so that when the next iteration comes out, they're still competitive, because given what they have done with the line, the 6 and 7 line, if there's really 3.5 4 years gap, let's say 3.5 years gap, you're going to see A7 IV before that, A7 V way before that, and an R6 Mark III way before the next 3 years. Now,
You think you think there's going to be an R6? Excuse me. You think there's going to be an R6 III before Z6 III?
no, before a Z6 IV.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah,
So
for sure. Okay,
right. So
right,
so they'll have to and so they'll have to ensure that they actually does compete with the next of Canon and the next of Sony
right.
well enough. And the Z6 and Z7 have been really successful cameras. By the way, they have sold in large numbers, and therefore the third generation will do wonders for Nikon.
I think the Z6 camera line is an excellent camera line. I've been using it professionally until about 2 weeks ago, and I'll still use it if I need to. And I'm using it right now. It's actually the camera that's shooting me right now is the Z6II. Um,
Same here.
yeah, so I would say let's talk about the things we think will definitely be true about the
So
Z6III.
so
If I could
I
start, and then
uh,
you could add in like what you think
uh,
I'm right or wrong about. I think the Z6III will have the same form factor, and I actually hope that it does, as the current Z6II. The form factor
mm,
I hope is the same. Um, I think it will have more megapixels than 24. The only reason I think this, because I don't think that's actually really necessary, but I do think it's true because Nikon made a point of saying that they wouldn't make any more 24 megapixel cameras after the
mm,
Z6II came out.
mm,
So, assuming they weren't like lying or they haven't changed their mind, then I think it's safe to assume that the Z6III will have more than 24. I don't know what that means.
mm,
My guess is that's somewhere between 30 and 36. Maybe it's 33 like the A7 IV, but I don't know. It's between 30 and 36.
mm.
I think the Z6III should have a flip around screen. This is something that Nikon hasn't done, and people wanted it on the Z8. I don't think it's needed on the Z8. I like the screen on the Z8 and the Z9. I think those are the appropriate screens for the use cases of those cameras. Um, but I think for the Z6III, I think a flip around screen is very, very prudent for the use case of a Z6III. And I think they probably know that. So I do think it's time that Nikon puts a flip around screen on that line of camera. And I
Mm,
think they will actually. I think that's going to happen. I'd be very surprised if they don't do that. Um, and I think that the media cards will be the same as what they are now, CF Express B and SD UHS2.
once again, I think something went
Yeah, looks like
wrong
you
again.
lost your feed, huh? Well, maybe just for editing purposes, I can continue to say this, and then we could edit it. But I think as far as the video goes, it doesn't need to have 8K. I don't think. But again, this goes back to the question of it has to compete with generations of Canons and Sonys that are coming after it. But I do think if it has 4K through 120 at full frame, that's probably good enough. Maybe it's 6K oversampled, something like that. Um, and the question then becomes, is it going to have a stack sensor and all the things that come with a stack sensor or not? And this is where I think it's a big debate, because this is an interesting thing that I've heard contradictory commentary about. One is that stack sensors are more expensive to put in cameras because obviously they're more expensive to manufacture, and the R&D that goes into them and all of that. And that makes perfect sense to me. But the flip side is people argue that it's cheaper because no mechanical shutter is now needed. And so the entire mechanical shutter mechanism is now not is dropped and doesn't have to be paid for. So I don't actually know if the net effect of that is that it's about the same price, or if it's still more expensive because the stack sensor is so much more money, or if it's actually a little less expensive because the mechanical shutter mechanism is more because it's a physical thing. I don't know. But that fact will determine in part what happens with the Z6III, in my opinion.
Mm,
Because if it is cheaper, I think they will clearly go with the Z6III with a stack sensor. I think it. I forgot to mention this on the points of things that we think are definitely going to happen. But there's no question in my mind the Z6III will have the Expeed 7 processor. There's no,
Hmm.
they can't keep using Xpeed 6. That's over, I think. So if it has the Xpeed 7 processor, and then if it can still have a stack sensor, well, now you have a really powerful camera that, it rivals the Z8 in some ways. It won't have 8K. It won't, perhaps it won't uh, have as many frames per second, but honestly, it probably could, because if it has the same sensor and or a stack, not the same sensor, but a stack sensor and the same processor and the same media cards, probably could shoot that fast. Um, it still won't have the Pro UI. It'll, like I said, the form factor will be Z6 or Z6, which is the little user dial. So it won't have the Pro UI. It won't have the bigger, robust body, and it won't have the lighting. And those things are important for people who think those are just gimmicks. They're not. If you're if you're shooting like with long lenses, the Z8 is a
Hmm.
much better choice than a Z6 or a Z7 if it's long
Yeah.
lenses. Um, and if you're shooting at night or in dark environments, the lighted buttons in the back are super helpful. Um, and the mode button is so much better than the dial. If you're like, for me, I only shoot my camera in manual. I never switch it from manual.
Yeah.
So the dial is useless to me. The dial sits in manual 100% of the time. I don't use the dial.
Hmm. Hmm.
So the mode button is great because now I can put it on manual and that's fine, but I have other options to use on that. There's other buttons there that I make use of, like white balance or frames per second or those kinds of things. And they're all readily available. So the Pro UI is actually a much better UI um, for most professional use cases. So the Z8 will always have that over the Z6. I'm
Hmm.
sorry I went back to Z, everybody. It's hard. It's a hard habit to break. But I think I say Z and Z almost interchangeably now. So you guys are rubbing off on me. Um, but anyway, I guess the question to me is all of those things I think are sacrosanct. What I don't know is the stack sensor. I don't know if
Yeah.
it'll be a fast sensor with a mechanical shutter or if it'll be a stack sensor. So frames, do you
I
besides that issue, do you see other issues that might be controversial?
no. I think actually I think there are a lot of things now, because the point of reference is not internal. The point of reference is going to be external. What I mean by that is, whatever you've seen on the Z9 and the Z8 is, because they're so close as cameras, is that is one point of reference, and definitely much of that will come down, namely the processor and the even probably the way they uh, handle the EVF, because there is no reason, because the processor can handle it. There is no reason for them to not have a continuous blackout free EVF, because essentially it's the same EVF, just brighter on the Z9 and the Z8. Okay? It's the same 3.69 million. Now the external point of reference.
Hold your thought. When you say
uh,
it's the same 3.69 million dots, that's true, but I don't think it's the same EVF because the nits are so much
hmm,
higher, and that's a big point that a lot of people have criticized. Like, just for those of you that aren't Nikon people that have heard that, oh well, the Z8 and the Z9 have a bad EVF, that's totally false. It's a lower
mhm,
resolution EVF, but it's a very bright EVF that doesn't black out and doesn't lag. So it's
hmm.
actually in many ways superior to the other EVFs. Do I
So
wish they would have put in a little more resolution? The answer is yes. I wish they would have, but they might not have because it might have interfered maybe with the blackout
hmm.
free. And the blackout free is better. It's better to have
now
blackout free.
now the thing is, the a brighter EVF can be made if you put a brighter LED behind the EVF. That doesn't essentially change the EVF, it changes the brightness of the EVF. Now, if you have, let's say, so I'm just saying that it is not a technological advancement on the EVF, because they already had 120 hertz on the Z6 II. Now, uh,
I
oh,
don't think so.
no,
I don't think so. I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure the Z6II is only 60 hertz.
I
The Z9 had 120. That's when they introduced it.
no, no, I think it's got a higher refresh rate. That's where the second processor. We'll figure that out. We'll see.
We'll
But
figure
let's
that
say
out.
I'm saying those are small changes, really. The refresh rate and the brightness are small changes. Now, i- the point of reference to me is what the Sony A7R5 have done with the flip screen. Now, the flip screen is great, but I think you need that versatility, because once you have that versatility, once you've seen that, I think the Nikon users are mostly photographers who are now also shooting video. They're not mostly videographers like Sony users who are who also at times shoot thumbnails as pictures. Uh, you, Much like Fuji users are primarily photographers. So if you look at their use case, they like Fuji had to bring back the uh, three-way tilt screen on the X-T5. They had moved to the flip out screen on X-T4, and X-T3, 4, and 5 are the most sold cameras.
Well,
So
isn't doesn't so but you said doesn't Sony has a compromise where you can flip it the normal
that's
way
what I'm saying.
and you
The
can
so-
flip it out, right?
yeah, that's what I'm
That's
saying.
the best. I mean,
Yes,
to give
that's what I'm
Sony
saying.
some credit, by the way, because I'm always so hard on them, that is the best idea of all in many ways. But
Yes.
the only reason I am happy with the Z8 over that is I suspect the Z8 and the Z9 it's more robust, meaning it won't break as easily, and that's important to me.
Mm.
But as far as design goes, the Sony is great because you have every option available. But anyway,
I
please
think
continue, Frames. I'm
that
sorry.
that is a very important implementation. I think going forward we can't be restricted to only either this or that. I think you need both, because when you talk about hybrid shooting, it should be both, frankly speaking.
Yeah.
And you're also looking at an audience segment who won't probably have three cameras. They'll probably have just one camera, and they would rather invest in lenses more than other things, and maybe audio gear and all those things, maybe software packages for editing and other things. So therefore I think that's a very important thing. The second thing is that the frames per second when it comes to shooting, that's where Canon have pushed it, and they've gone up to 40 frames per second so consistently, even for the APS-C, like small bodies, 1,000 US dollar bodies. So the question is, will Nikon does 20 FPS. That's the best they do. But that's when they're pushing 45 megapixels to the cards. If they let's say have a 30 megapixel camera, can they go up to 30 megapixels with RAW? Possibly. Will Nikon do it? I don't know. But those are open areas because Canon have shown the way. The Canon R6 II, except for resolution, is ahead of A7 IV in many ways. The A7 IV is still a more well-rounded camera because if you look at how the video features are implemented. For example, you can't do 10-bit 422 in any other picture profile other than log on the Canons. You can do in many all picture profiles can take 10-bit 422. Those are use case scenarios where you don't have to know how to handle log in order to just to be able to tweak your your videos a little bit better than they and make them better than what they come out straight out of camera. So I think there are areas, speed, frames per second, full frame 4K 60. These are the areas where Canon is pushing it. The point is, should we stop at 4K 60? Because I think if you look at the whole scenario at $2,500 US, what Fuji is providing is very, very powerful. Now they have the 1.4 lenses, although they are crop sensor bodies. The 1.4 lenses, stacked 25 megapixel sensor, it's a very powerful combination because the 1.4 is more low light. You have the same amount of bokeh as 2.1 f2.1, but you have more light essentially per pixel, and it's a 26 megapixel camera. Fantastic sensor, very high dynamic range, and it's a stack sensor. All comes bundled within 2,500 US. For someone who's picking up, and the new lenses are they're fantastic, good lenses. Unlike Canon's lenses, they don't have the new Fuji lenses don't have those problems. If I'm someone who's looking for a very well-rounded solution, uh, the kind of video and photo features Fuji is giving at that price point is incredible, and it can compete with anything that Nikon offers. I think Nikon should take a holistic view. I think this whole idea that full frame is the selling point does not work if you're not if you're not the best full frame in that price point, especially when you're coming at out of 4 years. So my question is, what will make, so my brief is, to me, I would say the 6 version 3 will have to be the best in its price point. In order for it to be the best, you'll have to take the screen from the Sony SN-R5. It has to be somewhere between 30 and 33 megapixels, possibly put in a stack sensor, because Nikon should use um, the power of the processor. The processor gives you two, three very critical things. The processor allows you to send separate signals to record information on the card, and to show you what's going on through the EVF. So you complete blackout free. If you have a shutter, you won't have blackout free experience.
Hmm.
Why won't you if you have the capability in that XP7 processor? Number one. Number two, you all those other bodies from the competition are using the sensor as shield, are using the shutter as sensor shield. Now, I'm sure after all this while, Nikon will have to use some kind of sensor shield this time, but it can't be the shutter because that's very fragile. If it can't be, then um, it should not use a mechanical, you know, shutter in that case, which means that I think we are looking at stacked lower resolution stacked sensor, probably not as fast as the Z9 and Z8s, because it doesn't have to be, because it's not going to be 45 megapixels. It's going to be probably 31 megapixels or 29. I don't know, something less.
Right.
Now, that explains why Nikon might have taken 4 years. If they're going to come back with a 33 megapixel slow as sensor that's put on the A7 IV, I think it's a criminal wastage of time that they have taken, and it's going to disappoint the market, and then not going to get people where it is the most easy to convert, because it's easy to convert. It is difficult to convert an A1 guy to a Z9 because it's a lot more money, very expensive lenses, much easier to convert as uh, R6 buyer, R6 Mark II buyer, A7 IV buyer, Fuji XH2S buyer, because the total value of the equipment is not that high. That's one. It also begins a conversation on what is going to be the crop sensor game. I think the shutter business is left well for the crop sensor cameras. That's it. I think for all full frame, and to me, the shutter and the processor are the two key technologies that Nikon have brought in. They have not done, they've done skin smoothing only now. They have not done a lot of, let's say, professional video observing tools on back of the screen. Unlike Panasonic, they don't have anamorphic de-squeeze. They don't have something like a catalyst browse. They don't have some of these things. They don't have, for example, some of the Nikon lenses have focus breathing. They don't have focus breathing.
Right.
I think if you look at the innovation is in the sensor, how they have managed it, and in IBIS, which is related to the sensor, and then it goes to the processor. For example, I was reading that one of the hardest part that the Z8 had to do is to figure out how do I give the same levels of stabilization when the space is much lesser on the in the Z8 body. Now they figure out these things. I think they, as in a very Nikonesque way, um, their focus has been solid hardware, not just software. Because Canon is giving you 40 frames a second with a subpar hardware that cannot do 40 frames, meaning the subpar sensor that cannot do 40 frames per second. If they were honest, they would have kept it to 15, because things will warp. And Nikon does not do that. Nikon ensures that your highest megapixel camera is 45, so that even if you're using a 6.3, f6.3 or f8, you don't have diffraction, because at 61 megapixel you start seeing diffraction quite early. And they're mindful of their um, 800 6.3 pf lens. They know that
How do they
if
how do they avoid the diffraction?
because diffraction is essentially the light waves bending, and they
Right.
bend if the opening is very small. And
So because of the mount,
because no, not because it's the aperture. The aperture is very small, then the light waves will bend to go through, and then
right?
you will have lots of resolution. They will not, the mount won't help
Right,
really.
but why is Nikon able to do better diffraction than other companies? I don't understand. Because to me, that would be the same problem for everybody.
Yes, but when you limit your best camera to, let's say, 45 megapixels,
Oh, it doesn't
and you,
show the diffraction.
yes, you won't have, yes, it will not have that. It
Got it.
typically, diffraction will not be recorded. So because you won't be paying for that extra megapixel and then not getting that resolution, right? Because the resolution will lost at
Right. So
f8
your point is that you have a 61 megapixel Sony, but you're not really getting the value of that because
in
you're
a lot of lenses. Yes,
in
in
a
a lot
lot
of
of lenses
shooting scenarios.
you're losing that quality anyway. Yeah.
Yes. So therefore, the bigger point I'm making is that Nikon is honest about what they're offering, and their technological innovations are based on the hardware, not coding. And I think because they've cracked it, they have the technology. They should do the same thing for Z6 Mark III or 3, because I think that will help them maintain image quality, maintain the lead that they have, you know, gotten in the other two price
So
segments.
it would be fair to say that the Z8 is not a baby Z9. The Z8 is a small Z9, but the
Yes.
Z6 III could possibly be a baby
Yeah,
Z8
baby Z9. Yes.
or
Z8. Yes.
baby
Yes.
Z8.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what, because
Yeah.
I think if I had a Z8 and a Z6 III that you're describing, that I could use those two cameras interchangeably.
One more thing I must add. Look, if you look at the customizability of an A7 IV or now the Canon R6 II, they have a lot more custom buttons. There is no denying that. Okay. And I think it's been a while. And I think now Fuji, they are giving so many. I mean, Fuji is so customizable. So we all know that. I think Nikon is ergonomically very good. There needs to be more buttons, and I like. I mean, it's a traditional design for Nikon, but I like that there is this other customizable button here. That is important. I don't think it will require Nikon. I'm saying add one more button, Nikon. One more button. There
Well,
should be a, yeah.
go ahead. Well, so I was going to say, I agree with you that they don't have as many, but the two that they have in front are
Hmm.
so much better than having, like, the other cameras don't have those.
Yeah, but you
And
see,
those are,
this
I use those all the time, every time I shoot.
same.
So I feel like having more buttons that are in places that are not available easily
Hmm.
when you're shooting isn't that helpful anyway.
No, but
So
the Z6 III will already have those front function
correct. So
buttons.
you're saying add more in addition to
Add
those.
more
Yeah,
at the
I
back.
agree.
The
I agree.
reason, and there's a reason why, because the current layout is a legacy. It's taken from Nikon's history, right? But if you look at cameras today, the functionalities within the camera and the kind of things you need quick access to have increased manifold. Your menu system has evolved. It's a much longer menu system now. Now, you, in order for you to shoot fast and be nimble with your camera, you need access to those powerful features quickly. The
True.
I button was an introduction. It was a great introduction. Now, I think they need that. I think it's important to
Well,
have that
and
one
don't
more
forget
custom button.
though, like when you're still shooting, you can use things like the record button as a function button.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
of course,
because
yeah.
that so there is another one. And the other thing, like Jerry Guionis, I saw him. He gave us he spoke in Austin a week or two ago, and he uses one of his function buttons to access the My menu.
Hmm.
And then on the My menu, his top, the he's got 4 or 5 things that he's constantly manipulating. So he hits the button, it goes right to that menu, and then he can instantly access those things.
Yes, but we
So
have to remember one thing. For Sony, you can actually program this dial,
right,
okay, and four ways. The four directions are four custom buttons. Same for Fuji. Imagine how much power that unlocks. Suddenly, you have four custom buttons there. I'm not talking about one or two.
right.
At one go with one dial, you're
Well,
talking four.
ironically, they already have the dial, which is a button. That could be a firmware update.
Uh, No, I don't think so.
Why not?
You
It's a
need you
button.
need hardware. You need wiring there, right?
Well,
You need to have.
it already is a button that reacts
to left to right and top and yeah,
Yeah, so why can't
possible.
you just
Yeah,
why couldn't you make
yeah,
a
yeah. I agree. I agree. I mean, they should probably do it. I mean, why limit? I mean, that is one of the things that I was hearing Matt Granger talk about and said, I don't know why Nikon limits a few buttons to some limited list of things that you can
right.
add. Yeah. So I think they should open these things up. I mean, it's an available real estate. Why not use it?
Yeah.
Especially when the competition is using it successfully. And frankly, because I'm using those, it's so useful. Fuji, for example, have swipes, for example. If you have right swipe, that's a function. Left swipe, that's a function. Those, and I'm telling you, those you can never accidentally swipe. You can't do, you can't swipe while shooting, and your nose cannot swipe. They have done it. They have done it carefully with care, and I
That's right.
think it's quite. You have a touchscreen. Nikon has consistently given us a touchscreen, unlike Sony, for example. So I think they should use the real estate better. And if they do that, I think we're really talking. See, because the other thing, like I keep going back to that, market share is going to be important. As the market shrinks, there is not going to be space for 4, 5 camera companies. There's going to be space for 3 camera companies. And I think Nikon will have to take market share. They'll have to push towards 20%. Right now, that this 12, 13% will not work. They'll have to push towards 20%. And in order to do that, they have to ensure that people can seamlessly move back, or in case of Sony users, move back to Nikon, and in case of Canon and Fuji users,
Well,
try give Nikon a try.
that might be an
Without
argument. That might be an argument, honestly, for the Z90 that we call the Z90, which is basically, except I might consider calling it a Z80.
mm,
And the reason is I think if you took the Z8 body and put a stacked um, APS-C sensor in it and sold it
mm,
for like $2,500, that
mm,
camera would sell. All the bird people would buy that because again, no other APS-C camera on the market has anywhere near as ergonomic of a feel for using long lenses, which is exclusively what these people use.
mm,
That's why the D500 was so successful.
mm,
And so Sony has all these APS-C cameras, and so does Canon, but they're little small, uncomfortable cameras. And if you had a big, robust, professional UI body, you use the same as the Z8, so it's economy of scale, which is why also the Z7 and Z6 should be continue to be the same body. Um, then you have all you're doing is swapping a sensor. That's it.
the problem with that strategy is that typically the birding guys or wildlife guys don't shift because the lenses are very expensive. You don't. It's a barrier to shifting. So the shifts happen. I have
Well,
seen people.
well,
You,
remember,
mm,
that's actually a great point if you're really like a high end person.
mm,
But if you're
mm,
actually just a consumer bird shooter, like 90% of the people are online who talk about
mm,
this, they only buy one lens. They buy the 200
mm.
to 500
Yeah,
or the PF 500.
yeah,
That's it.
yeah.
So actually, when the 200 to 600 comes out, all they need to do is get the Z80 body and the 200 to 600, and they're done. That's it. That's all. That's the whole rig. And
Possibly.
that whole rig can be less than $4,000, or it could be like $4,000 to $5,000.
Yeah, possibly. But I'm saying, I honestly don't think that birding and wildlife is a very big genre. That's a very specialized. It goes along with travel photography. It's a
But
very niche skill.
it's also a poor man's sports setup. It's also a poor man's action set. Like if like for example, if I were going to shoot
Yeah.
um, like the way I will now be like the way I was shooting, like if I shoot my nephew playing soccer, I'm not doing that
Mm.
professionally. I'm just doing that for fun and to get nice
Yeah.
shots, right? So before I was using the Z6 with the 70 to 200, or sorry, I wasn't using the Z6. I was using the Z50 with the
Mm.
70 to 200 because I needed the reach, and I
Mm.
didn't have a teleconverter, and I didn't want to buy it just for that because it's not a I was just doing it for fun.
Mm.
Now I'll put the 70 to 200 on my Z8, and I'll go to DX mode,
No,
and
no.
I'll have an incredible
Agreed.
setup.
Agreed. See,
Right.
but
But I'm
mm,
saying I would never buy if I was only shooting soccer of
mm,
kids. not for money, I would never buy a Z8 for that. Too expensive.
Oh, of course, of
So
course. Now
so
the
if they gave a camera that could perform like a Z8 in DX only
Hmm.
for much less money, I believe that camera would sell a lot.
Most people who buy cameras are buying in front when they're using the camera on a tripod and sitting in front of them, or doing making reels. Most people who buy cameras are buying an ultra wide, a 35, 50, 85. That's your staple. So that's your use case for most people. I think sports, wildlife, those are or 1.2 portraiture lenses. They're extreme cases. I would say even say that something like a 28 mm 2.8 dedicated street photography lens. Those are extreme cases. Most people buy a general 20 to 85. If you look at Panasonic, they have been surviving on that. They have been surviving with a 20 to 85, and they didn't. I mean, all the Panasonic guys, they're happy with it, right? And Sigma has their lenses for their mount, good enough. They never felt the need to get into birding or extreme sports. That's a very specialized area. Fuji
Right,
is
but
trying to go
it's a
there.
specialized area that Nikon, Canon, and Sony have
Dominate.
captured.
Yeah, absolutely. Now Sony is starting to dominate also. But the point I'm making is that for I I really think that you're right, for a D500 user, a Z80 is fantastic. But I'm talking about a typical Z6III. How can that attract more of the
Right.
Canon, Sony, and other users?
Well, you're
What are
right.
they using?
The
What are
stack,
they doing right now with with their cameras and gears? They're shooting films. They're doing casual photography. They're doing weddings and events photography. For those use cases, we need them to come onto Nikon, and I'm also starting to say Nikon at times.
right?
They come to Nikon and then see if they can appreciate the S line f4. No one has f4 lenses that's an S line or the supreme line. No one has 1.8 S line. Canon doesn't do that.
Uh,
Canon ignores the sacrifice and compromise on quality on 1.8. Forget f4s. That I mean, that's what you're talking about. These guys can come in. They have high professional grade f4s and f1.8s,
you
like
can
you said.
shoot any professional wedding with the 1.8 primes from Nikon. The S line 1.8 primes are as pro as you ever need, and they're light and small, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And they're great. I've shot tons of weddings with the 85 1.8 and the 35 1.8, and they work great. And you don't like. I don't even know that I would ever like. I have the 85 1.2. I use it for portraiture. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to take that to an event. So a lot of people do, and they were waiting for that, but it's big. And the 85 1.8 does a great job, and it's small and light.
Especially the Z8 now.
Right.
Now, look at the real strength. The real strength is that 24 to 120. That's the real strength.
That's an incredible lens.
That's one lens. Is that one weapon? That's a nuclear bomb. Okay, that's one lens.
Nobody has
That
that
lens,
lens. Nobody else has that lens.
and even if they bring in, they're probably not going to have the
Well, I
quality and
mean,
the balance
uh,
of that
what's
lens.
what I'm saying? Other people have 24 to 105, but
Mm.
they don't have 24 to 120. But
I'm talking-
that difference isn't so big. It's just that the quality of the lens is so much
exactly.
better.
Even if they bring in the quietness, lack of focus splitting, sharpness across, character, I mean, those things, build quality, those balance in the hand, those things matter. Now, those things, you have that lens. Do you have a Z6III with you that can compete and say, hey, you're looking at a high burst shooting at Canon? Don't worry about it because they warp after 20 frames per second. Okay, come here. I'm going to give 15 good 15 frames per second. Okay, I'm going to give you full frame, 10 bit, all of that. I'm going to probably push it to 100 fps, if not 120 fps, and I'm going to give you a stack center. Your camera is sorted because you have a shutter shield, and you're never going to have to face blackout. Those things,
And
those
you know
are
what they should
hard
do?
technologies.
On top of all that, they should say, and if you turn in your Sony or your Canon camera, we'll give you an extra $100 off.
100.
An
Yeah,
extra
possibly. Yeah, yeah.
on top of the trade-in fee.
Yeah. Possibly. But what is the
Just give
Nikon gonna do
incentive.
with
Be
it?
like, hey, trade your gear in, and
Yeah,
we'll make it worth your while because you're not going to want to switch from Nikon once you
I,
get the lenses.
and I think that is, I really think Z6 III, at every step Nikon takes, it should be, how do I get the market? Because Z9 is a market share gain. They brought, you know what? It did, what it did was it stopped the loss, potential loss. It was a stop loss. How did they do it? People are really thinking now, time for me to jump onto Sony bandwagon or Canon. They stopped that from happening. Z8 shifter. It's a switch maker. Z6 III has to become a bigger switch maker. The question is, and I with looking at what Nikon's been doing, I think there's going to be Z50 Mark II, and it's going to be kick-ass camera. It's not going to have the compromises like that. Look, you in Canon you have 1.6 crop. Here you're going to have 1.5, but then the colors are fucked on. Sorry, on Sony. Here you won't have that problem. High ISO performance on on Nikon is fantastic. The Z30 autofocus is amazing. It is so well weather sealed. I mean, the Sony cameras really look like toys. The
Compared to
Z30,
what? Compared to the Z30?
yeah,
Okay.
Z30 is such a tiny camera. It's so well built. It's incredible.
I've never held one.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a Z50, but which
yeah.
I
I mean, and Z50. I mean, imagine a Z50 Z50 Mark II.
yeah. The
Oh,
Z50 was actually like I got great shots of my nephew playing soccer with even with the inferior autofocus system, like that, like even still with just using like the small area box,
hmm,
I got great shots. Now, obviously, it would be much better with the new AF system and the new uh, Speed processor. But you're right. If they put something like if they made a the Z52 Z50 Mark II should have it should have a flip around screen, not the
hmm,
down one. It should go to the
yeah,
side or something because that's the down
yeah,
one's hard to use.
yeah,
Um, and it should have the better autofocus, and it should be able to charge while you're using
yeah,
it because that's
yeah,
something the
yeah.
Z50 can't do. Um, but other than that, the camera's great. Other than those things, the Z50, the current Z50, is still a great little camera.
Yeah.
Um,
No, but I absolutely. But I think that's the opportunity. I look at the Z50 Mark II and the Z6 Mark III as doing the same job as
right.
get people in. Why? Because now I have the what's it? 35. What did they just launch? Oh, the 24 1.7. Now I have the um 24 to 120. I have these things ready. Now I have the power zoom on for DX. So now is the time. Now is the time to bring those guys in. Now is the time because those compromises on Canon and Sony will start to show, and there are loads of compromises. I mean, for example, I can tell you it as a battery drops. I make this point in other Z8 video that there was no performance loss when uh, when there was a heat warning. No performance loss when the battery dropped down to 25%. That's not the case with Canon. As the battery goes beyond below 50%, there is a performance loss.
Yep.
It's well reported. So, right. So I'm saying, and Nikon took that amount of care to ensure that with the lesser voltage of this uh, smaller batteries, this camera performs equally um, as good as the Z9. I think, and I always keep talking about this, that honesty of intent is what stands out when it comes to Nikon, and I want that to see. I want to see that when it comes to the Z6 Mark III, most of all, that honesty of intent.
When do you think we'll see a Z6 Mark III?
I think we'll start getting rumors by before Christmas, and we'll probably see it either in December or in January.
Okay, so you think it's possibly next year, like or end of year, possibly next
End
year.
of year, yes.
You don't think they're going to put a camera out in September, October, the fall?
Not. I haven't heard of that. I haven't heard of that. But having said that, if you look at the lens lineup, they're already done with most of it. Okay, and they can take a bit of time with the 135. They'll probably push out the 35 earlier than that, and the 200 600 is going to be here in a month or so.
Yeah, I think
So
that one's got to come right away.
right, so I mean, you really have the job list is free. I think Nikon has a surprise camera thing coming up because the lens lineup is almost done for the year, and they haven't even mentioned what's happening next year. So they're saying, okay, this is what you had promised. 40 lenses will be out by the end of March 2024, and the bulk of it is already out. From 200 to 600, a month away, done. Then we'll be waiting for the 35 1.2 and the 135. 70 to 100, the 70 to 180 Tamron version, I mean, Tamron Nikon 1, is going to be a silent launch. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
that'll
okay,
just drop one day out of
let's
the blue.
drop one day.
Yeah, because
So
it's already done.
essentially, yeah, essentially, the calendar tells you till March you have two launches. Because I'm considering the 200 to 600 being launched. It's already there. Okay. So you've essentially two things to talk about from now and March. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there is going to be more news coming from Nikon. It cannot be that they only have a 35 and a 135 till March. I think there's going to be more. Whether it's a DX camera, because we have seen a slew of DX lens launches, or the 6 Mark II, I don't know.
Right.
And I really want them to decouple 6 Mark II, Mark III with the 7 Mark III.
I
I
think
really
they
want
will.
them to
I think
decouple
they
it.
will. I think they will. I just thought maybe that the Z6 Mark or Z6 III might come out in August, September, only because
Mm,
that's the 3 year. That is the 3 year mark from the Z6 II.
mm,
It came out. Z6 II was announced in August of 2020.
mm. Yeah.
So, but it doesn't mean that they'll do that. I just thought 3 years is a good amount of time. But you're right. There's still some other cameras that could be refreshed, like Z50 and Z5. It'll be interesting what happens to Z5. If
Mm,
Z6 III goes to a stack, then I think it's pretty clear Z5 has a place without a stack sensor.
mm, mm, mm.
Just to be a great regular camera that doesn't have the speed. Um, so there's a lot going on. There's a lot. The
Yeah,
biggest
but I think it's a great conversation to have for us to have started, because I think I'm very curious to know what the rest of the commentators have to say once this video goes out. I'm very curious to see what Matt Irwin has to say and whether he has any news. I am curious to see what Matt Grange has to say, or Richie has to say, or Fahagan has to say. I'm very curious about what people generally will say.
Right. I mean, I do think so. I talked to you about this offline, but Tony Northrup made that video about Sony having this big surprise potentially in the future where they're going to switch over to an Android platform and sort of take the market by storm because they'll have very sophisticated transferring abilities on their camera that don't
Mm,
exist today and that are hard to replicate with the current architecture. So it's an interesting video. I know a lot of people aren't fans of, or are many people are fans of him. Obviously, his channel's very successful. Him and Chelsea, they have more than 1.5 million followers, so they're doing something right. But I know they've also aggravated people in the past because sometimes it appears they have biases, even though they deny it. I'm not making a stand one way or the other, but that particular video was very interesting because I do think he made points that were interesting and potentially true. Like I thought about what he was saying. I'm like, gee, that's a good point, and he could be right about that. And so it'll be
my
interesting.
my
What?
only thing is that if that has to happen, so we'll try that first with either a crop APS-C body, an APS-C body, or the A1 Mark II. Either
Right.
of these two. Either
But
they're going to
imagine if
try
it's the
it,
A. Imagine if it's A1 Mark II. That's a huge like statement.
and I don't think that's going to happen because pro users, what if you're a think about it. What if you're an iPhone user? You're not familiar with Android at all. What happens then?
Well,
And I think
but I
most
don't know.
A1 users,
I think it's an Android base, but I think the UI on top can look similar to what it looks like now. So I don't think it will change how you use it as much as it will be effective when you use it. So like when you're
mm,
going to the transferring stuff, you're getting all the
mm,
benefits of the modern Android capabilities. But you can still choose from a menu that looks
it's a
similar to the old
lot
menu.
of re-engineering. I mean, what you're saying is that I don't know a lot about UI, but there are a few things that are very central to the technology and the UI. If you change the UI so drastically, you're
Oh,
talking
then it
about
won't
a
work.
lot of code, a lot
Okay,
of type.
yeah, you might be right. I
Complex.
don't know. I don't know.
I mean,
I'm
you
not
have to get into a contract with Google and get them to work on it. It's not
a,
easy.
I'm not a computer programmer, so I have no idea. I don't pretend to know what I'm talking about. I'm just imagining, like, if what he said was true, that would be a very relevant step that presumably Nikon and Canon would struggle to match for some time.
I
And
have
that,
a point of view on that, and I could be completely wrong.
but I
So
don't know. I'm just trying to look for that. If I had to say what are Nikon's weaknesses, right? Because we've talked about their strengths. Their strengths
no,
are their hardware and their lenses and the fact that they have the best hybrid bodies now. And basically, from photography and hybrid video standpoint, they're the best
no,
technical brand on the market.
I
But
understand. But before you go to software being a weakness of Nikon, I want to say something, and I think it's very important. I think if you look at the Android market, if you look at Google as a company, if you look at their size, in order for them for Sony to do this, they have to create APIs. And I know these things superficially, and anyone who knows about these things in the audience can explain. This integration process is a deep integration process. This cannot happen without Google actually opening up and actually making it happen. This does not look financially viable or even interesting in any way for Google to do it unless it's an industry thing, because the numbers of cameras are not that high. And if it's an industry thing, if all platforms say, as a camera body association, I'm just making that up, we all need this integration, then you're talking about millions and millions, because Google is going to do that on a fee per camera sold or whatever number of users, that fee. If that number is not meaningful enough, Google is not going to open up their technology to someone, a vendor like that. When you Google does that for a handset seller, Google does it for a handset seller. If I'm tomorrow a company from China, let's say, I say I'll have so many millions of phone buyers, and they will have two critical things. They will have Google Chrome and your Google products in the phone, on the phone, number one, and I'm going to pay you a fee anyway. So, if the numbers don't do justice, Google is not going to put resources. It is not about Sony putting resources to it. It is about Google doing it for Sony.
okay, look, I think you might be right. I don't know enough to know, but I just thought it was an interesting video. It's worth watching either way, even if you end up disagreeing with it, because it's an interesting perspective and he makes good points. And he doesn't pretend that he knows either. He's just hypothesizing.
Yes.
But I think it's clear, like when it comes to the cameras, the only real physical like advantage to come is a global
Mm.
shutter, right?
Yeah.
And basically, Nikon has approached the global shutter the most of any brand right now with the fastest stack sensor, right? Because a stack sensor is trying to do what a global shutter can do, basically, right?
There is one
So,
more thing.
okay, well, what's the other thing?
You, uh, who was it that sent? It's either you or Matt sent me a picture very recently of the sensor that Nikon developed, where you don't have to expose for highlight or for shadow,
Oh, right.
because it can capture both. That transforms photography.
So what Frams is saying for the audience is, imagine a sensor that could selectively, at different parts of the sensor, could selectively have different exposures, so that the highlights would not be crushed. You would bring that down, but the shadows would be brought up. So you have very, very high dynamic range. Is basically
It
what he's saying.
it will match the human eye or more.
Right? It's basically infinite. It's dynamic range. It's like everything is HDR at that point, but like in
And
a
Nikon has the technology. I mean, they are a hardware innovation company. Today, when people talk about
okay. So
innovation,
that
now
would
it
be
is
a
software.
way to do through hardware what computational photography is doing through software, like on an
But
iPhone.
then you can always hire the computer guys. Now imagine doing that on that hardware.
Right.
That's the
Right.
fun.
Right. I agree with that. That's my point. So my point is, there's the things that are still left are better sensors, maybe global and maybe multiple exposures on the same frame. And then there's the computational side. of like the things
Mm,
iPhones can do that make them look like they're actually really good when they're actually not very good.
mm,
But the fact is, the computational photography is so strong that they make that little crappy sensor actually give images that, at least on the phone, look really good.
mm.
And it's true that people are mistaken about how good they are because when you start blowing these things up, they don't look that good typically.
Yeah, or
But
you want to choose sports, you can't do that because you're taking you're getting multiple pictures. Damn thing will move.
right, so they have limitations, but the point is they've made a very inferior product compete, which means if you did the same thing with a superior product, you should get incredible results. But that is
Yeah.
something that is yet to come. There's no cameras that are doing really the computational stuff yet. So
Mm,
it seems like between having a global sensor and maybe a sensor like you discussed, where you have like the physical, not software, but the physical capability of just discerning between highlights and shadows as you
mm,
expose. And then on top of all of that, the computational software side to make it even better. So if Nikon has a weakness right now, I guess it would be potentially on the software side and the transfer and also the transferring of files that goes along with that. Because Tony does make a point. Like, I do think people today with their iPhones are so used to shooting a picture and
mm,
immediately sharing it. They can
mm,
immediately put it on social media. They can immediately send it to a friend. And it seems like cameras should be able to do that. It seems like I should be able to
mm.
shoot a picture on my camera and be like, boom, it's on Instagram, or boom, it's in, like, hey, frames, look at this picture I just took. Boom, it's to your phone,
Yeah,
right? Like, there's no reason why that can't happen. We already do it with phones.
yeah.
So it seems like that's a good direction for the cameras. And I think Nikon may or may not. So we don't know what Nikon's doing because they might be
Mm,
laughing at me because behind the scenes, they already working on this for a long time, and they probably are. I hope they are. I mean, these people are not stupid. These people are very smart. These are great engineers. I mean, I think Nikon's engineers are probably the best. That's why they make such great products. But the fact is, that's a potential weakness.
yeah,
Just trying to say. But anyway, I think
yeah.
I think Nikon's poised now. I think Z6III, as you say, frames is a very important product that could possibly start to steal market share from the other companies. We could see people migrating back to Nikon. It's started to happen in a very small capacity already, but if that could happen a little more frequently, that would be great.
Mm,
And Z6III could be the one to do it, and so could Z5 too. Honestly,
yeah,
depending on what that ends up being, and so could Z50 too.
yeah,
So it's going to be an interesting
yeah,
time.
yeah. I mean,
I hope there is another camera this year, or something significant. Um, anyway, what were you saying?
I, I am now. I think we should close it.
Yeah,
And I think now is a very. I think it's a critical time for Nikon because I'll tell you why. Because Z6 II, although it's a fantastic camera, it does not show changes. It does not show. It does not need to show advancement. It doesn't show change. Now the next cameras will have to show change, and the direction of the change is critical. Therefore, I'm very keen on seeing what happens with the Z6 Mark III, or Z6 III, or Z52 and Z52, and a possible ZFC. I am personally not that keen on the Z7 III. There could be a camera next year. I don't know, but these things will give Nikon a direction.
uh,
So I'm
I
very
do,
curious to see what
I
happens.
do want to say one thing. If they make a ZF, a ZF, if they make that
Yeah.
ZF camera, if they do that, if Nikon is listening, and who knows if they are, but if anyone from Nikon's listening, that camera, I'm not. It's not. I don't have a ZFC. It's not really my thing. I don't like APS-C cameras that much, and I have a Z50, which suits my
Mm,
needs more if I am going to use one. But I think the ZFC or the ZF is something I would consider as not for professional work at all, but just for having fun and
yeah.
maybe using manual focus lenses. And so, like, a lot of the Voigtlander lenses are so so nice and so, and they have a deal with Nikon, so that's, something that they're working with Nikon. Nikon should add manual focus um, aids to the ZF that don't already exist in the other cameras. So they already have focus
Mm,
peaking and they have
mm,
the little green confirmation box,
mm,
but they don't have something like the Canon where the two arrows match, which is kind of
mm,
reminiscent of the old Nikon split screen focusing in the old SLRs. I think they
mm.
should add a mode like that. I think they should have as many manual focusing aids as possible and many new ones, or at least one good new one on a ZF. That would be a
Mm.
great thing to add to a ZF.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think we'll do an episode on ZF because let's save it for that. We'll
Sure.
do an episode for ZF, and I think and that's something ZF is something very close to my heart. I think so if there's a Z6III and a ZF, I don't know which one to get, but I'll probably get one of them. Not probably both of them,
I
but
have to
definitely
get
one of
I
them.
have to get the Z6III because to me it would be a second camera for work.
Yeah, yeah,
So I have
yeah.
no choice.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what I mean. That's why I'm saying there's a we don't know. See, we kind of knew with the Z9 a little bit of the Z8, but we don't know the rest of it. We don't know the direction of the rest of the lineup is going to take. We can only make guesses looking at the lenses. I see TX lenses. I see small plastic mount lenses, which are very high quality. So the ZF is probably a reality, going to be a reality. I have heard rumors about it as well. So there's a lot to be sort of unfolded. There's a lot to be explored for all of us. I think this year is still going to be a very, very exciting year.
What are the
I
gut? Do you think the guts of the ZF is going to be a Z6III or a Z6II?
I think it's going to be either a Z6III or a Z72.
Okay, or a Z7 II?
Either this way, go to the extreme, or go that way, go to the extreme. Because Z72, you're talking see what Leica is doing with high resolution rangefinder style cameras. That's the sort of I, I mean, you have top two options. You don't have to have high you know sen- fast sensors and all those things. You don't need to have burst shooting. You can have resolution and very um, rich colors, very fantastic files. Like one of the best files you get in from any camera is from the Z72, right? It scores even higher on DxO mark than the Z8 and the Z9. So they could go that way. They could go that way because then you save the money because it's a sensor that's already in existence.
Right, and
Why
then
not
the
use that?
autofocusing isn't as important. And if they added some manual focusing, if they did the manual
Yeah.
focus stuff, then
You
yeah,
can still you can still have the XP7 missing a few cores and improve the autofocusing. Look at Fuji X-S20. They've used the old sensor, but then they've used a new processor. So it focuses better than the rest of the cameras
right,
that they launched last year. So I think a lot is in the processor. They use the processor in the older sensor. It works. I think there are two ways to go. So we'll discuss more on that.
right.
And thanks, Baron. It was a long and very interesting. We covered a lot of points, lot of topics. I'll probably break it up, and we'll see how to present it. So thanks for joining us, and it was great to have you. Please follow. I'll put the link for photography discourse in my I'll pin the link to Baron's channel, and also write the link in the description. I learn a lot talking to Baron because he's got such rich, complex, nerdy yet exciting way of looking at cameras, the conversation around cameras, gear, use case scenarios, and the market in general. So definitely follow him. In fact, I look forward to more content from you, Baron. So I hope now that you've settled down a bit, we'll start, creating, pushing out more
I have to
videos.
get back on it. I just want to say also,
Mm.
to return the compliment, but it's very sincere. I've because of YouTube, and this is interesting. Like I would never have known you frames if it wasn't for YouTube, and you
Yeah,
never would have known me. And
yeah,
it is something like I have my ups and downs of my opinions about YouTube sometime, but I will say this on that level of the access to humanity and
oh,
how we were able to become not only like kind of colleagues, but also even more importantly, friends,
yeah,
is incredible. And you have been an inspiration in many ways, even to me. And like, many others, I'm sure. And I want to say that like Frames is not a professional photographer, meaning he doesn't make money off of his photography, but his skills are as good as any professional. So he's quite a good photographer, quite a good content maker. He makes wonderful videos, and I if you haven't, if you're probably already following him if you're seeing this, but if you're not, you should be. So please do follow Frames. He's the real thing when it comes to YouTube.
Well, I think that's heavy, but thank you. I my focus is to create better content, of course, and but then I can't resist myself uh, talking about rumors and all those the other not gossipy things, because that's also enjoyable at times. Because today what he did was is borderline that, but at the same time, I think
You know,
there was a lot to learn from this conversation. I think
ru-
it's not all that bad if you gossip, because
rumors and gear talk also, on some level, it can be too much and it can go overboard, but it does excite the imagination.
yeah,
I think that's the reason why we do that, is because we're fantasizing about the future and what could
yeah,
happen, and we love these amazing marvels of engineering that we call cameras now. We love them so much that we just, and then we think, whoa, what could be next? What could be
yeah.
next? So of course they're going to talk. I think that's the reason for it. As long as
And
we keep it all in
I-
perspective, I think it's okay.
I'll just before and I'll say this and we'll close the conversation. And I have to say that uh, about about gear talk. Now, a lot of people will say gear doesn't matter. I agree, gear doesn't matter for photography and filmmaking inspiration or learning to a great extent. But to execute your imagination, execute your vision at times, not at times, the gear has to always assist you, because I think the skill is in finding the moment, the angle, the composition, in your ability to tell the story, to when you edit on your edit board, to be able to create a fantastic final product, but and your intent, all of those things. But for example, if you know it and the camera is not focusing because there is some issue there, that's not
Okay.
that's not right. So that that stops you from achieving your full potential. So, in a way, gear matters. In a way, gear allows you to sort of open up and unfold your full potential. And that's the, I think,
Hey, can you still hear me?
yeah, I can hear you.
I don't know why this went off. I guess I can shut it off. And I didn't mean to interrupt that.
No, no, that's okay. No, just, I think switch off and switch on quickly.
Yeah,
It's
that's
the
what I'm
same
doing.
thing that happened to me, I think.
I just switched off and switched on, but I don't know
And
why.
at the bottom, just check if its top cam is on or not. Then you switch it on.
So it's a start cam.
Yeah, yeah,
There
yeah,
we
you're
go.
back.
I
Yes,
don't know why
yes.
that happened. I would
I think
just,
it
I guess I would add
autofocus.
your point about gear not mattering and mattering and people saying it doesn't matter. I want to just say I agree with you, Frames, completely. Gear does matter on some level, but I would put it this way. If you don't have the skill, you're not going to get the shot. It doesn't matter about the gear.
Yeah.
If you do have the skill, you might get the shot depending on the gear you have.
Yes. That's what I
Okay.
meant. And very important, what happens on the edit board? It depends. I mean, you have different cameras and different files. Let me tell you, no matter what the Sony guys tell you, no matter what they tell you, if I give him he goes out with his Sony cameras thinking he's not going to miss any shots because the autofocus, and takes all the videos, he takes all the pictures, and then I tell him all those pictures, all those shots, all of them, I'm going to give you all of them, but not the what ARW file, which is the Sony files. I'm going to give you NEF files, which are the Nikon files. He'll be glad that he has all those shots, but in the NEF format, because the Nikon formats, the Fuji formats, they just color grade better. They just bring to life your vision better. I saw someone called D Rosa, and he has this beautiful Fuji channel. He says that I love Fuji gear, and said I used to use Sony, and he said he made this wonderful, amazing comment. He said that he said, I'm going to take also the example of another photographer, another YouTuber. He said that since I've started using Fuji, I have grown as a photographer. My business has have grown. I'm no more stuck to rusty golden sunset colors and just teal and orange. That tells you everything. It tells you that, and I connect with it because immediately I know that the moment you start editing the Sony files, you start seeing, see, your edit will go towards what looks good for that file, and you will see that Sony files take you towards that, either a sort of rusty gold look or a teal and orange look. And the other person who's talking about this was Matt, person who does Sony, Manny Ortiz said that, I have to say the A7R5 is fantastic because the white balance was fixed. What was funny is that he never talked about color and white balance before that. He said, it's all fine, I can always edit. But then when he had the Sony A7R5, he said, oh, now look, this is so much better. I'm letting my A1 go because I want to keep the A7R5 because that's the colors output, the skin, the tonality are so much better. So it matters because at the edit board, I think 50% work happens at the edit board, especially in the age of AI and so much decision enablement that happens with AI. Your creative vision is brought to life so much on the edit board, and those choices that you make, that brings out your taste. There also gear matters because the feed is coming from a gear, whether you have an nraw nlog, or whether you have a 10-bit 265 from Nikon, or from any other camera, or the NEF files or ARW files. Those things matter.
Yeah,
So gear does matter in that way as well.
agreed. Agreed. All right.
So Baron, it was great having you, and I'm going to see you very soon with another video. Follow Baron in the just click the link and follow Baron. I'm going to see you soon with another video.
Peace, everyone.
Cool.